There's a name for what you did on the street this morning. You looked at someone, a half-second glance, just long enough to register they were there, that they were human, that they posed no threat, and then your eyes slid away. Down to your phone, off to the middle distance, anywhere but back at their face. Sociologists call it civil inattention. You perform this ritual dozens of times before reaching work, and you'll perform it hundreds more before you get home tonight. Every person you passed did the exact same thing to you. On any sidewalk in London, any subway platform in Tokyo, any crosswalk in Manhattan, you can watch this happening in real time. Two strangers walking toward each other, a brief flicker of eye contact, and then a mutual, perfectly synchronized withdrawal. The whole exchange takes under a second. It requires no words, no agreement, no instruction, and it is holding the modern city together. Civil inattention. The sociologist Erving Goffman defined it in 1963 as the unspoken contract between strangers to acknowledge each other just enough to avoid collision, but not enough to require interaction. But the deeper mechanism behind it, what Georg Simmel in 1903 called the blasé attitude, reaches further back and cuts deeper. Billions of people perform civil inattention every day across every major city on Earth, and almost nobody realizes they're doing it. Civil inattention isn't just a habit though, it functions as a defense mechanism. And to understand why every person in every crowded city on the planet performs it automatically, you have to go back to the question Simmel was really asking. What does the city do to the human mind? Simmel didn't rely on brain scans or controlled experiments. He walked through early 20th century Berlin and observed something subtle about city dwellers, something easy to miss. Their emotional reactivity had dimmed, their willingness to engage with strangers had narrowed, their capacity to respond to the world around them with the energy it deserved had quietly eroded. This was the blasé attitude, and his explanation for why it existed cut straight to biology. The human nervous system was never built for the density of a modern city. Think about it in terms of raw scale. A village of 150 people lets your brain emotionally register every face you encounter. You know the baker, you recognize the woman who walks her dog past your house each morning, and you carry a relationship, however thin, with nearly every person you see in a given week. Your social world fits inside your head. Now step onto a commuter train in Tokyo carrying 2,000 passengers, and that same brain hits a wall. It cannot emotionally process 2,000 faces, cannot track 2,000 moods, cannot hold space for 2,000 sets of needs. The volume of incoming human information overwhelms everything the nervous system was designed to handle, which meant the brain does what any overloaded system does. It installs a filter. Picture an email inbox with no spam filter, where every face on the street arrives as a new message, every siren an advertisement, an overheard phone call piles into the queue, incoming, 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 until the system chokes. The blasé attitude is your brain finally building that filter. It doesn't delete the messages, it just stops surfacing them. And that is not a character flaw or a sign of apathy. Your nervous system is rationing its resources so you can keep functioning in an environment that would otherwise shut you down. Simmel's insight didn't stay in Berlin. Robert Park carried it to the University of Chicago, where his student Louis Wirth turned it into a foundational claim that urbanism itself is the distinct way of life, one that reshapes personality at scale. Nearly 70 years after Simmel, a psychologist at Harvard named Stanley Milgram picked up the same thread. Working in what would become the field of urban psychology, Milgram studied what happens to human behavior under the specific pressure of urban density and framed it as urban overload, the idea that city dwellers develop behavioral shortcuts not out of cruelty, but because the volume of stimulation exceeds what the brain can process. His research surfaced an uncomfortable finding that city residents are measurably less likely to help a stranger in need than people living in small towns. Not because they carry less compassion, because their attention has already been allocated, the filter is running and the surplus has been triaged away. Between Simmel's blasé attitude, Milgram's urban overload, and Goffman's civil inattention, a single phenomenon emerges from three different angles. The psychological armor that every megacity citizen puts on the moment they walk out their front door. And here's the thing about that armor. It works. A crowded city sidewalk operates like a coral reef. Thousands of organisms packed into the same tight space, each one moving according to its own internal logic, and the reason the whole system doesn't collapse is that every single creature has agreed, without ever being told, to maintain a precise distance from everything around it. The moment one organism breaks that invisible spacing rule, the whole local ecosystem ripples. You felt that ripple firsthand. Someone on the subway locks eyes with you for 3 seconds too long and your body goes rigid. Someone in an elevator launches into conversation and the air in the room shifts. A stranger on the sidewalk plants themselves directly in front of you, staring at your face, and something in your chest tightens. Not because they've threatened you, but because they violated the contract. Goffman's analysis confirmed exactly this, that breaching civil inattention through sustained eye contact, unsolicited conversation, or standing too close triggers immediate tension, discomfort, and even fear. The anthropologist Edward T. Hall called the study of these invisible boundaries proxemics, the way humans use physical distance to regulate intimacy and threat. Every culture draws these lines differently, but every culture draws them. The armor holds because everyone wears it at the same time. But there's a cost to all that protection, and you've probably felt it too, even without knowing what to call it. There's a woman you see every morning at the same bus stop, same time, same bench. You've never spoken to her and you don't know her name. One Tuesday she isn't there and you notice. Something small shifts inside you, a quiet unease you can't quite place. Milgram had a term for this person. He called her a familiar stranger, someone you recognize through sheer repetition but have silently agreed never to acknowledge. The relationship between you is real, it exists, and it runs entirely on silence. Intimacy at the lowest possible resolution. One of the most common human connections in a city, that gap between seeing someone every single day and never once speaking to them reveals the price of the filter. The same defense mechanism that makes the city livable keeps you at arm's length from the people standing right beside you. And the numbers confirm that price in ways that are hard to look past. Depression risk runs 20% higher among city dwellers compared to people in rural areas, and anxiety disorder risk climbs 21%. For psychosis and schizophrenia, the gap widens to roughly 2.5 times higher in heavily urbanized environments. Researchers identified a dose-response relationship buried in the data where the more years of childhood spent in a city, the higher the adult risk. Urban density doesn't just correlate with psychological strain, it accumulates over a lifetime. And that's when the loneliness data turns the whole picture sideways. According to Cigna's Loneliness Index, 57% of American adults reported feeling lonely, up from 46% just 6 years earlier, with 2 out of 3 lonely adults saying they feel excluded from meaningful social groups. All of this in a country where the majority of the population lives in metropolitan areas, pressed up against millions of other people. Loneliness flourishing in the most populated spaces humans have ever built. That is the paradox sitting at the center of all of this. Living in a megacity feels like standing next to an amplifier cranked to 10, all day, every day. At first, the volume is staggering. After a while, you stop hearing it, not because you've gone deaf, but because your brain has classified the noise as permanent and stopped reporting it. The trouble is that it also stops reporting the music. Anyone who has moved to a large city recognizes this arc. Week 1, every car horn registers as an event, every stranger's face carries a story, and the smells and signs and sheer scale of everything floods your senses wide open. 5 years later, you walk past a screaming argument on the sidewalk without turning your head. You step over someone sitting on the ground and your pulse stays flat. Simmel described this exact shift over 100 years ago, the inability to react to new sensations with the energy they deserve. Your nervous system hasn't hardened, it has been recalibrated for survival. Somewhere inside that recalibration though, something got lost, and the only moments that reveal what's missing tend to arrive without warning. During a blackout, a flood, a citywide emergency, when the normal systems of a city suddenly stop functioning, something strange and almost euphoric takes over. Strangers speak to each other. People carry groceries for neighbors they've never met. Someone knocks on your door to ask if you're okay, and the warmth of it hits you harder than you'd expect. It's as if someone yanked the dimmer switch of a room that's been kept in low light for years, and suddenly everyone can see each other. The full brightness of human connection at city scale floods in, and it is overwhelming in a way that feels completely different from overload. Not exhausting, almost unbearable in its warmth. None of that loss. Within days, the dimmer slides back on because it has to. Sustaining that level of connection with every person on your block, your platform, your commuter line would be blinding at scale. The filter returns because the city is still the city. The density hasn't changed, the stimulation hasn't changed, and the brain goes back to doing what it learned to do, which is protect you. But that flash, that temporary burst of openness during a crisis, proves something that matters. The capacity for connection was never gone. It was being managed, suppressed carefully, and automatically by a mechanism you never chose and never noticed. That changes when the smartphone enters the picture, because something happened in the last 15 years that Simmel, Milgram, and Goffman never had to account for. Simmel described the blasé attitude in 1903 as an internal process, an emotional withdrawal that happened inside the mind. Pulling off that withdrawal required real psychological effort, even when it ran below conscious awareness. You had to actively look away, zone out, dim your awareness of the crowd pressing around you. And that's when the smartphone rewrote the equation. It handed every city dweller a physical tool for performing the blasé attitude, a glowing rectangle that gave your eyes somewhere to go and your attention somewhere to hide. The device didn't create the defense mechanism. Civil inattention is over a century old. What the phone did was externalize it, automate it, and strip away the last trace of effort. Before, ignoring strangers required a small act of emotional labor. Now it requires nothing at all. On any subway car in any city on Earth, you can watch the result. An entire crowd performing Simmel's blasé attitude in perfect unison, heads down, faces lit by screens, each person sealed inside a private digital envelope while pressed shoulder to shoulder with 40 other human beings. The filter used to activate in response to genuine overstimulation, too many faces, too much noise, too much of everything. Now that filter runs even when the stimulation is manageable. In a quiet coffee shop, on a park bench with only 3 other people in sight, walking down a residential street where nobody is asking anything of you, the phone keeps the filter locked on. And the question sitting at the center of the loneliness data, 57% and climbing, is whether the defense mechanism has begun outpacing the threat it was originally designed to manage. People may now be shielded not just from overstimulation, but from any stimulation at all. The spam filter your brain built to keep the city from overwhelming you is catching everything now, including the messages that actually matter. This isn't a problem with a clean fix, and that is worth being honest about. The defense mechanism exists because it works. You cannot function in a city of 8 million people while remaining emotionally open to every person you encounter. The blasé attitude, civil inattention, the whole invisible architecture of urban social behavior, none of it is a malfunction. It is an adaptation, and an effective one. The psychological armor makes the city possible, but that armor carries weight. And the weight accumulates quietly over years, in the form of familiar strangers you never speak to, neighbors you never meet, and moments of human warmth that flicker during a blackout and vanish the moment the power comes back on. The tension between individual survival and collective connection is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It is quiet, constant, and sits beyond any easy resolution. A mechanism designed to make the city livable may be making it uninhabitable in a way nobody planned for. Tomorrow morning you will leave your home and step into the city. You'll walk toward the station or the bus stop or the intersection where the commute begins, and a stranger will approach from the other direction. Your eyes will meet theirs for half a second, maybe less, and then you'll look away. They will do the same, and neither of you will think about it, neither of you will remember it happened. But now you know what civil inattention is. You know the reason it exists. You know the cost it carries. You've been performing the most common social ritual on Earth every single day without ever being taught it, and so has every other person in every crowded city on the planet. A silent and mutual agreement, billions of times a day, to see each other just enough and no more. Stopping isn't the answer. The city requires the filter. But noticing might change something. Holding that half-second glance for one beat longer, letting the filter soften even slightly for the person standing right next to you, not because it will change the city, but because it might change the commute.